Welcome to Kromecast. Check it out. I'm Sam Major, Chief Commercial Officer of Chrome Technologies. I'm joined once again by Ben Randall, Technical Director.
Hi Sam, thanks for having me.
Look, you're welcome, because this will be the most exciting one
I know.
we've ever done. So just to cover that, we're talking about backup, recovery and resilience, which, as viewers will know, backup isn't the most exciting subject, but as we'll get into, it's the unloved subject, right? It can be boring, but it's absolutely necessary, and people don't necessarily take all the factors into consideration when thinking about, as we say, backup, resilience, business continuity, understanding the difference and so on. So in true form, Ben, if you can talk about the three things we're going to cover, and graphics people will overlay my face with some boxes and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So we've got why does backup, DR, BCP matter more than ever? What are the differences in those bits of terminology, things like RTO, RPO and so on? And the three things that you really should be checking now, really, can't leave it.
Okay, so I guess let's jump in to the big one. And as I say, it isn't the most exciting, but it really does need to be considered. Why does backup matter? And realistically, why now more than ever?
Well, ransomware is getting more and more sophisticated as time goes by. You know, you've got AI-driven ransomware, all this sort of thing is creeping in there. And so it'll sit dormant potentially in your network, deleting, corrupting your backups if they are not completely air gaps and offline, with a sort of dwell time. So it means that if, depending on your retention of your actual backups, you might actually then it's corrupted all those, then it goes after your data, and you've really got nothing to fall back on. Then you've got, moving on from, I mean, there's that which is significant. Then you've got the kind of the SaaS blind spot, as we call it. Which is, so, I've got my stuff in the cloud, it's fine. But
I mean, you say that. I've literally had a conversation this week with a customer who is using Microsoft 365 and so on, and we asked them about backup, and they went, it's in 365. I'm like, hang on, can you clarify what you mean? Well, it's in 365, Microsoft Backup 365, so we're good. And you have to have that difficult conversation of, no, Microsoft Backup the platform. And if it goes down, they will restore the platform. But your data, nothing to do with them. Absolutely, you need to have and I think actually if you read the small print in the contract, it says that you should have a third-party provider in place.
Microsoft do provide backup options in there, but you need to have that and pay for it. And you know, none of this is free. And you know, again, if someone accidentally deletes something, deliberately deletes something, or worse, then you know, you can lose your data. You need to be able to restore it, even if it's in a SaaS platform. Then finally, the most exciting one of all is compliance. So we've got ISO 27001, NIST 2, sorry, and the Cyber Essentials Plus, where all those require backup, business continuity, DR, to be plans to be present, documented, and tested, and evidence provided of that to be able to achieve those certifications.
I think it's probably worth jumping into then. I guess so again, speaking to a customer, you know, we have backup, fantastic, right? And how do you then achieve disaster recovery? We have backups. And it's like, okay, right, and you know, devil's in the detail clearly. So you know, most of our clients will know there is a difference between you know, backup, significant, you know, DR, and business continuity. But I suppose for the purpose of those that maybe don't or are new to the podcast, we can jump into, I guess, the terminology and definition between those three, and then I guess how they actually feed into one another.
For sure, they're all one's part of the other. But backup. Say you've got a backup of your files, great. But if you've got a disaster occurs, say you have a flood or something like that, and need or somehow the virtual machines where that data is on.
Literally had a client in yesterday who had this is going back a little while, but his Exchange server was on fire.
Actually on fire.
And the CEO is going, how long will it take you to recover from that? And he went, I don't know, I've never had one on fire before. There you go.
Yeah, that's new. But yeah, so that is an illustration of why we need disaster recovery, because I would suggest your Exchange server actually being on fire is a disaster. So basically, you need to be able to recover the data. Also, you need to be able to recover the server that it runs on. And going into that, you've got business continuity, which actually goes beyond IT, which is like, your building burns down, where's everybody going to work from? They have to work from home, all that sort of thing. And all that requires planning, documentation, and so on. So, none of those things are the same, but they all feed into each other.
Absolutely.
So it's very significant.
I was going to kick it back to backup, excuse me, just quickly. There was something you mentioned initially that I think is actually quite important we talk about, ransomware and so on, and the air gap, the immutable copy of backup. I think actually we should probably dig into that, because now more than ever, backups used to be server backs up to tape, potentially in an autoloader if you were feeling, wanted to be expensive and special, fancy, and that autoloader would rattle through the same tape over and over again for many years until you discovered that actually it didn't work anymore, because no one used to do restores.
You never did the restore test.
No, and when you did, you worked out that actually most of your data was on the drive head and none's left on the tape because all the metal particles are being eaten up by that thing. But we're better at backup and backup practices nowadays, disk to disk, and someone's fixed a lot of those problems. But in the age of ransomware and AI and so on, that air gap.
Well, absolutely. The basic rule with backup is the 3-2-1 rule. So you need 3 copies of your data. At least one of those potentially is the one you're working on. So you've got 2 other copies. Then you have 2 types of media. So might be on disk, the other's on tape or in the cloud or something like that. And then you've got at least one is off-site. So if your building burns down, or your backups don't go with it. So, simple terms, it's like that. Other things to consider are the RPO and RTO. So the RTO being the recovery time and objective. So it's how long is it going to take you to restore? So if your business has got a very important server and it must be running all the time, you can't be offline for 24 hours, then you need to look at a solution which can provide you with that rapid failover or something like, it's going to be quite expensive. It's a more tricky way of doing things. But if you've got other servers which don't need to be restored for another 2 or 3 days, that's great. But you need to look at those real critical servers, the ones which have got to be business critical, got to be up in 3 hours or something. More commonly, maybe you can be offline for a day if you have to. But, especially if they're very big, it might take a long time to do a restore. So, and you look at your medium you're using. If you're restoring from the cloud, what's your bandwidth to be able to restore back?
So that's tying into a bit there. Is that rather than backup, we're into DR. We're pushing into business continuity there. There's different factors. We're talking. Obviously, there's the backup bit, but that RTO. Some of our customers will have it's 0 downtime, and then you're looking at things not just backup. We're talking asynchronous, synchronous failover and all that sort of good stuff. But that really ties into that DR business continuity, because if you are a finance house or running an application that can have 0 downtime, that's a much more in-depth project solution and beast indeed to run. It's a big step, and this is why we had to differentiate between this, need to back it up and need to have got an off-site copy for compliance and so on, to full-on business continuity planning. It can be, depending on what vertical you're in, what you do, enormous amounts of expense and planning, but finance compliance, you have to have that system available 100% of the time.
Also, that feeds into the RPO as a recovery point. So, how much data can we lose? Are we backing up once a day? And if so, can we lose a day's worth? Since the last backup, if we back up at midnight last night and we need to get this morning's data, we need to have more regular backups, more granular backups than that. So all that has to be considered.
And that's, again, part of the work we do with our customers is working through the kind of tiers of application and data and whatnot. What's a tier 0? So I need to recover it immediately or within, let's say, 4 hours, and then tier 2, until you get to the tier 4, which is meh. It can go.
That's the test environment. We could do that 3 weeks from now.
Exactly. But that does really factor into this. I'm kind of at pains to really show the difference here between backup and DR and business continuity. There are distinct differences, and one is made relatively simple these days. I think so. We've been Cloud Connect provider, so we can have a JBOD on site. We can put a nice backup to there, and you can do disk-to-disk restores very quickly. So you're talking about that kind of point in time. It's an exact copy. So if we lost it there, we can drag and drop it, and it's immediately available.
Yeah.
Then we've got an immutable copy in some object storage off-site.
Exactly.
So now we've got the 321s and so on.
That's your, like, the meteor crater still smoking, but you can kind of like you bring the data back from another place.
Good. Yeah. But then it's like you said, it is that the DR bit is, if there is the big hole in the ground, well, what do we do? But where do we rehydrate this? And we do services around. Some customers will have a second geographic site, and you could restore it there. Others might push all their workers from home, and we can enable that. It might be that you rehydrate the Veeam backups into something like Azure or G-Cloud or AWS, or whatever it might be.
This is something that we've done quite a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that restore is in the cloud. You don't use it for your production normally, but in DR situation, you can actually do that.
And that's where we need the input of the businesses that we work with, because that's where, as you touched in the very beginning, it's that BCP bit is really driven by
the business.
Yeah, we have to have that brief of, you have to role play the scenarios, right? If you got to the point there was a big smoky hole in the ground, what does the business do? Yeah. Then we map the solution from an IT perspective to how do we enable that?
Yeah, and all that process, how it's going to work, and all that stuff has to be documented as well.
Yes.
So you might not be there.
Yeah,
the
might be in a smoking hole in the ground.
Whatever, you might be on a holiday or something like that, but someone else needs to be able to and that's, in places where I've worked before, and for other clients, we've had the DR test is run by someone who didn't write the document. So then you can, it's the ultimate test. You can kind of say, well, actually, I'm stuck on this, when the person who wrote it knew exactly what to do, but they haven't documented every step.
Yeah, do it properly. Make it so anyone could run it, and almost practice that. I think that's the other thing that we'll see is,
that feeds into the points, the things you need to do now.
Yeah.
The final piece really is like, check that your backups are immutable, that you've got sufficient retention, so that you can go back beyond a reasonable period where the data becomes so old it's useless.
Yeah.
But you need to retain what you actually need to be able to restore for compliance reasons, and to deal with these ransomware issues.
Yeah.
You need to be running a restore test. I mean, at least annually is a requirement for, I think, all those certifications. Need to validate that, and as I suggested, it needs to be documented, and ideally needs to be run by someone other than the person who originally created the plan, because just subconsciously the stuff you do, I've fallen into that trap. So yeah, we all have.
Very true, and it's the get that documentation out annually as part of that test, and make sure it's still actually applicable to the situation, because IT, as we know, moves so quickly, and with all the best will in the world, you may have written, our BCP plan January 3rd. And by the time we get to that next year, actually, we will be a vastly different business, as will all our clients. So it is that due diligence in place around best practice, check the documentation, check the process. And because, as we opened up talking about, whilst this isn't the most interesting subject we've ever covered, there's no flashing lights.
It's one of the most important.
But it really is. And anyone that's had that problem where you've stood in the server room up to your ankles in water and all that sort of stuff, right?
That moment is when you thank your lucky stars you did do that piece of work. It's okay, we couldn't pull in these tapes from this offsite Iron Mountain, whatever it might be, of online, to pull that data back. Yes, it worked. We tested it last week. It's fine. We're good.
So for that moment of rapture, it's worth taking time to actually ensure
Hopefully
that
you'll never need it.
Yes.
But
look, it's as with all these things, it's an insurance policy. And we hope that we as a business never need to do it. We hope our clients never need to invoke DR or press the button on a full BCP plan, because it's fantastically painful. But if you have to, you want to be safe in the knowledge that we can, that we know what we're doing, that if Bob wrote the policy and Jane's here to run it, that she can, because we know that it's detailed enough and so on. So look, potentially not exciting, absolutely, non-negotiable.
Yeah. Well, for those regulatory reasons, your auditor is going to turn over that stone, and if they find there's something lacking there, they're just going to keep digging, and you're going to regret it.
Perfect. Yeah. And hopefully no one does find themselves in that horrible position of having a disaster and not having the plan in place. But, if you'd like to spend some time talking about the world's most exciting subject, then please get in touch.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ben.
You're welcome, Sam.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Kromecast. We have a masterclass coming up on backup, resilience, DR, business continuity, all the exciting things that we've covered today. But as we've pushed the message quite hard to say, it is super important, and Ben will go through kind of best practices, what you need to consider, what you can do. So that's coming up in August. There'll be a link down below, so please click on that and register and spend some time with Ben then. And then if there's anything else you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please leave that in the comments section below. We'll be happy to cover that. Cool. Join us again on Kromecast. Check it out.